If Jupiter disappeared right now, almost no one on Earth would notice. No alarms would sound. No earthquakes would shake the ground. No strange darkness would sweep across the sky. You would wake up exactly as you always do. The sun would rise. Traffic would build. Phones would buzz. People would complain about work, drink their morning coffee, scroll through their feeds, and move through another completely ordinary day. And that is exactly what makes this scenario so unsettling. Because if Jupiter suddenly vanished, the greatest danger would not be what happens immediately. It would be what happens slowly, silently, quietly enough that humanity might not understand what had begun until the process was already impossible to stop. At first, nothing would seem different. But hidden behind that ordinary morning, the entire architecture of our solar system would have just lost one of its most important foundations, and from that moment on, everything would begin to change. To understand why, you first have to understand what Jupiter really is. Most people think of it as just another planet, a giant ball of gas floating far beyond Mars. Huge, impressive, visually beautiful, but ultimately distant and irrelevant to daily life on Earth. That perception could not be more wrong. Jupiter is not simply one planet among many. It is the gravitational giant of our solar system. A world so massive that it contains more than twice the combined mass of every other planet orbiting the Sunday. Let that sink in. Every planet. Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune. Combine all of them. Double that total. Jupiter is still heavier. Its gravitational influence extends across enormous distances, subtly shaping the motion of countless celestial objects. In many ways, Jupiter is less like a planet, and more like one of the invisible structural beams holding the solar system together. Remove it, and the consequences would begin immediately. Even if nobody could see them, the first thing to understand is that Earth itself would not suddenly be thrown into chaos. This surprises many people. You might imagine Jupiter disappearing and instantly pulling our orbit out of balance. But space doesn't work that way. Despite its enormous mass, Jupiter is still incredibly far from Earth, roughly 484 million miles away. At that distance, its direct gravitational pull on our planet is relatively weak compared to the dominant forces acting on us every moment. The Sun controls Earth's orbit. The Moon strongly influences our tides. Jupiter's effect, while real, is subtle. If it vanished this second, you would not feel it. The oceans would not suddenly rise. The atmosphere would not distort. Gravity on Earth would remain unchanged. You could live your entire day without noticing anything unusual. And for a brief moment, it might seem like nothing had happened at all. But that calm would be deceptive. Because elsewhere in the solar system, the consequences would already be unfolding. The outer planets exist in an intricate gravitational relationship. A cosmic choreography that has evolved over billions of years. Every planet pulls on every other planet. Most of those forces are tiny. But over astronomical timescales, even tiny forces matter. Jupiter plays a central role in this balance. Its immense mass helps stabilize orbital resonances throughout the solar system. Think of it like the anchor point in a vast rotating structure. Remove the anchor, and the entire system begins adjusting. Not instantly, but inevitably. The first shifts would be microscopic. Slight deviations in orbital paths. Tiny alterations in angular momentum. Subtle disturbances so small, they would initially require precise instruments to detect. But here is what makes orbital mechanics so unforgiving. Small deviations do not remain small. Given enough time, they compound. And once those changes begin cascading through interconnected gravitational systems, prediction becomes extraordinarily difficult. This is where the true danger starts. Because Jupiter does far more than stabilize planetary motion. It also protects us. And it has been doing so for billions of years. Astronomers often describe Jupiter as Earth's cosmic shield. That phrase sounds dramatic, but it is not an exaggeration. The outer solar system is filled with dangerous objects. Asteroids, comets, fragments left over from the violent formation of planets. Many of these objects follow unstable paths. Without interference, some would eventually drift inward toward the inner solar system, toward Earth. Jupiter's gravity acts like a giant gatekeeper. Sometimes it captures these objects. Sometimes it redirects them. Sometimes it slingshots them completely out of the solar system. Its gravitational field constantly reshapes the trajectories of potential threats. And while it does occasionally send objects inward, overall its presence significantly reduces the long-term bombardment Earth might otherwise face. Without Jupiter, that protection disappears. Not in a dramatic burst, not overnight, but steadily. The invisible traffic control system of our solar neighborhood would be gone. And slowly, the sky would become more dangerous. At first, humanity would notice only through telescopes. Astronomers would begin tracking unusual orbital deviations, objects in the asteroid belt behaving unpredictably, comets taking paths they should not be taking, near-Earth object projections becoming increasingly concerning. Initially, these anomalies might seem unrelated. A statistical fluctuation, a measurement error, an unusual but explainable coincidence. But over time, the pattern would become impossible to ignore. Something fundamental had changed. And once scientists identified the source, the implications would be terrifying. Because by then, there would be nothing anyone could do to restore what was lost. Jupiter is not replaceable. There is no technology humanity could build to compensate for the disappearance of a planet over 300 times the mass of Earth. The loss would be permanent, and the solar system would begin adapting without it. The asteroid belt would likely be among the first regions to destabilize in a major way. Today, many of its objects occupy relatively stable or semi-stable gravitational niches influenced partly by Jupiter. These delicate orbital arrangements have persisted for immense spans of time. Take Jupiter away, and those patterns begin to unravel. Collisions would become more common. Large bodies could fragment into smaller ones. Debris fields would expand. Orbital paths would become increasingly chaotic. Some objects would be pushed outward, others inward. And among those drifting inward, some would inevitably cross Earth's path. This would not mean immediate extinction. Hollywood tends to imagine giant impacts as singular apocalyptic events. Reality is often more complicated, more gradual, and sometimes more frightening. Instead of one civilization-ending strike, humanity might face a growing frequency of smaller but still devastating impacts. Regional destruction, climate-altering dust events, repeated disruption, a slow accumulation of planetary trauma, death by 1,000 celestial cuts. But asteroids would only be part of the problem. Because over longer timescales, the disappearance of Jupiter could begin affecting Earth's orbit itself. Even small orbital changes can have enormous consequences. Earth exists within a remarkably narrow habitable zone. A slight shift closer to the Sun increases heat. A slight shift farther away reduces it. Even tiny variations in orbital eccentricity can alter seasonal intensity. That matters more than most people realize. Civilization depends on climate stability. Agriculture depends on predictable growing seasons. Water systems depend on relatively stable weather cycles. Infrastructure is built around expected environmental conditions. Change those conditions enough, and the systems sustaining modern life begin to fail. Not instantly, but progressively. Crop yields become less reliable. Storm systems grow less predictable. Ocean currents shift. Regional climates transform. Migration pressures intensify. Supply chains fracture. Governments strain. And because these changes unfold over decades rather than days, humanity might spend years debating what is happening even as the crisis accelerates. This is what makes slow-moving cosmic disasters so uniquely dangerous. They do not announce themselves. They do not trigger immediate panic. They unfold gradually enough for denial, gradually enough for hesitation, gradually enough for political paralysis. By the time the danger becomes undeniable, adaptation may already be impossibly difficult. History shows that humans struggle to respond to threats that evolve slowly. Now imagine facing one rooted not in economics, politics, or human behavior, but in celestial mechanics. There would be no negotiation, no treaty, no technological shortcut, no emergency intervention capable of restoring Jupiter. The laws of gravity would simply continue unfolding their consequences, indifferent to our survival. And then there is the truly long-term nightmare. Over millions of years, planetary systems can become chaotic when key gravitational stabilizers are removed. Chaos, in the mathematical sense, does not mean randomness. It means extreme sensitivity to initial conditions. Tiny differences producing wildly divergent outcomes. Without Jupiter, the solar system could gradually enter a less stable configuration. Earth's orbit might become more eccentric. Mars could experience larger perturbations. Interactions between outer planets could shift resonance chains in ways difficult to predict. In extreme scenarios, entire orbital architectures can be rewritten. The chances of catastrophic planetary collisions remain low, But they are not zero. Orbital ejections become possible. Worlds drifting into deep interstellar darkness. Frozen forever. Imagine Earth slowly moving farther from the sun over geological time. Temperatures dropping. Oceans freezing. The atmosphere collapsing into crystalline frost. Civilization ending not in fire, but in silence. Or worse. A slow inward drift. Rising temperatures. Boiling oceans. A runaway greenhouse effect turning Earth into something resembling Venus. Either outcome would erase everything humanity has ever built. And all of it could begin with the disappearance of one distant world. What makes this thought experiment so profound is what it reveals about our place in the universe. We often imagine survival as something determined by what happens here on Earth. Our technology, our politics, our decisions. And those things matter. But our existence also depends on enormous cosmic conditions we rarely think about. The exact orbit of our planet, the stability of our star, the gravitational architecture of the solar system. And Jupiter is one of the most important pieces of that architecture. For billions of years, it has silently influenced the conditions that made complex life possible. It helped shape a cosmic environment stable enough for evolution to unfold, stable enough for intelligence to emerge, stable enough for you to exist. And yet most of humanity barely notices it. It hangs in the darkness, a striped giant suspended hundreds of millions of miles away, silent, massive, seemingly disconnected from everyday life. But remove it, and the story of Earth changes forever. That may be the strangest lesson of all. The universe is filled with forces quietly protecting us. Invisible structures of balance we rarely notice because they have always been there. We tend to fear obvious dangers. The asteroid we can see, the storm approaching the coast, the threat we can name. But some of the most important protections are the ones so constant we forget they exist, until they are gone. And maybe that is the most unsettling thought this scenario leaves behind. If Jupiter disappeared tomorrow, humanity would not panic. Not at first. The morning would still come. The sky would still brighten. Life would still feel normal. And somewhere far beyond what human eyes can perceive, the slow machinery of disaster would already be turning. Because sometimes, the most terrifying catastrophes are not the ones that arrive with noise. They are the ones that begin in perfect silence.